everyone.
Morning.
Thank you for joining us this morning to celebrate the solstice in a very Aboriginal way in our province of Newfoundland and Labrador. But this is a special time for us in many ways. First of all, this year we celebrate Canada 150. And as we celebrate the great country that we're so proud to be a part of, we want to be inclusive of all people. And back some time ago, Minister Bennett and I were having a conversation, and she said, Yvonne, I think we should be launching the Aboriginal part of Canada 150 on the solstice. And we could do one in the summer, and we could do one next year in the Western Arctic, but let's start on the east coast of Canada. So it was her idea, and when she had that conversation with me, well, of course, I left as I do, and right away went to work and tried to get this going. So after nailing down Seamus and emails to Chris, everything started to turn. So thank you for coming this morning and sharing in what is, I feel, a wonderful celebration, and probably one of the few Indigenous celebrations that we've seen on the lawn of Government House in this province ever in my lifetime, that I've been to an Aboriginal ceremony here. And probably, I don't know if there's ever been one, maybe long before any of us can remember. So I think we've struck a new note, and that makes me very proud. So my name is Yvonne Jones. I'm a member of Parliament for Labrador. My proudest accomplishment, I guess, in representing the fine people of our northern region of the province. And also the Parliamentary Secretary for Indigenous and Northern Affairs. And I get to work with Minister Bennett on many interesting projects that affect Indigenous communities across Canada. This morning I want to welcome Minister Bennett to our province and to be with us here in St. John's in Newfoundland and Labrador. I want to welcome my good friend and who's your Premier, Premier Ball, who's been a strong supporter of Indigenous people in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I've had the privilege to work with him for many years on moving forward Indigenous files in Labrador, and I look forward to being able to work with him in doing that for many more years to come. I also want to acknowledge this morning Chief Michelle Joe. Thank you, Chief Joe, for joining us. We're so happy to have you here. And for those of you in the room, I'm sure Chief Joe is no stranger. He's certainly been a strong leader for his people. All of us have been to Conn River at one point or another, and we've seen the magnificent work that you've done and that your people continue to do. I want to welcome traditional teacher and spiritual leader, Emma Rills. Emma is a good friend, longtime friend from Northern Labrador, and it's so good to have you here this morning. And of course, I want to recognize my colleagues, MP Seamus O'Regan from St. John's South Mount Pearl, no stranger in this room. And every time I come here, I have to say, I wonder, do I call Nick now or call Seamus? Because we have this courtesy call about when we go to each other's ridings, right? So I never know where the line is here, so I just send both of them a little text. And they say, as long as you spend money when you're here, we're happy. So it's very simple. I also want to acknowledge Nick Whalen, who's a member of Parliament for St. John's East. He was here with us this morning. He's gone to bring his children to school, so he may be back shortly. And also, I want to recognize Graham Leto, DMHA from Labrador West. And it's so good to see you here, Graham. And of course, we do a lot of work together in Labrador. MHA Bernie Davis, nice to have you here, Bernie. Thank you for coming. And MHA Jerry Rogers. Thank you so much, Jerry, for being here with us and supporting the work we do as well. So we have lots of people gathered here who have very particular interests in Indigenous culture and have done a lot of work to advance and revive the culture of Indigenous people. And I look around the room and I know everyone here, of course, and I want to thank all of you for the work that you do and for the representation you bring. So this morning, I had the pleasure of acknowledging that this is the traditional territory of the Beothuk, and now the home of other Indigenous groups such as the Innu, the Inuit, the Métis, and the Mi'kmaq. And I would like to invite spiritual elder Emma Rillis to offer her opening prayers. And she's already lighted the Budlik, but she will tell you about the Budlik. But Elder Rillis is an Inuk from Nain. She's a traditional teacher, spiritual leader. She's very proud of her home in Nutsiavut. And for the past 50 years, she's made St. John's her home. She's a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and she's worked in the healthcare system and has a passion for helping women who experience violence. She has served several terms as president of the St. John's Native Friendship Center, and she's been honored as a recipient of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee for her services to the community. Please join me in welcoming, I always want to say elder, but I'm not going to, our traditional Inuit teacher, who we're so very happy to have with us. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you for your wonderful words. I want to tell you about the week at first. This hard tonight. This was a sort of heat that they used years ago for cooking and drying, but I don't know how they lit it, because it's so hard to light it with the draft and all the, I don't know how they kept it lit, but anyway, this is the source of heat that was used for the Inuit years ago, but it was much more. Very proud to be able to do it. Thank you. God, creator of all, great spirit of light, thank you for the gift of a new day, today being the shortest day and the longest night. Come to us out of the east with the power of the rising sun. Let there be light always in our words and on the paths that we walk, to mark the important role of people working together in shaping the landscape of the four seasons of the year in our community, our province, and our country. We have to remember the long journey that it has taken to get here in the upcoming year in celebrations of the 150th anniversary of Canada. Creator, guide us with your vision to work together to accomplish more years of service with good hearts, good minds, working together to a prosperous future. Amen.
And Nakamik, Emma, thank you for your prayer, and thank you for sharing the Budlik with us this morning. And as a traditional land of your people, we know what it means to survival of life. I now have the privilege of introducing the Honorable Carolyn Bennett, the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs. I've known Carolyn for quite some time, and in the last year I've had the opportunity to work with her as a parliamentary secretary. And I have learned so much from this remarkable woman who's been a strong leader for Indigenous people in Canada. There is never a day too busy to not take the time to deal with issues that are important to Indigenous people. And I can't say enough good about this woman, but I do want to share a couple of words. And oftentimes you will see her with a heart on her sleeve, literally a heart pinned on her sleeve. And that's not by accident. It's because people who know her and work with her know that she not only wears her heart on her sleeve, but she's very in tune to Indigenous issues across the country. And her work is driven by her passion, her love, and her caring for Indigenous culture and people. And over the last 12 months, we have made remarkable strides in moving forward with the Indigenous agenda under her leadership. So please join me in welcoming her to our province.
Nakamik, it Yvonne, it is emotional for us to be here at Government House and in this spirit of reconciliation, and it is, you know, when I come to Newfoundland and Labrador, it always reminds me of what people from other countries say about Canada, about our attachment to the land, our attachment to the people, the fact that we learn a lot from Indigenous people in order to stay alive as the settlers arrived, and it makes who we are. And I was thinking last night here at Government House with Lieutenant Governor, or with Siobhan Cody at dinner, who taught me a lot on my first trip to the rooms, that this is it's about this amazing privilege we have as members of Parliament to be coast to coast to coast and to find out what it is to be Canadian. And I think, as you know, to have a proud Labradorian like Yvonne Jones as my parliamentary secretary, Seamus, and your attachment to the rooms, this is a joy that we want to share with all Canadians. And today, as we launch this sort of Indigenous reconciliation thread and theme of Canada 150, it is about hoping that all Canadians will start to feel what it is to have a relationship with Indigenous people and what it means to have new friends. You can only do this in a relationship, and that my new friends, who are First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, are what have changed my understanding of what it is to be Canadian. And so it is from the heart that we gather together, and it is about now as recognizing the languages, Ganash, Kaminan, Nakamik, Marsi, Walali. It is about acknowledging the territory where the Bennett people are no more. That this is a very important place for us to acknowledge what happened, and for us to begin this year of reconciliation with a very sad story about a people that are no more. The language, the culture, that there are teachers for us, and it unfortunately is about a history, and what the message for reconciliation for Canada 150 is about the present. It is, and about the future, and it is about how the way we see our relationship with Indigenous people in this country. It's about the now and the forward, as we acknowledge the past that has been a difficult and unpleasant chapter, really, in our country. So it was really for you to light the public, and for us, for your beautiful words. I thank you, Teacher Emma, and it is about, as we acknowledge the solstice, it is about acknowledging the return of longer days. That we today get days longer, and that this kind of ceremony about being able to mark these important parts as we is also the return of hope and the better future between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. I can't thank you enough in terms of the drum group and the beautiful words and the sunlight ceremony. It is a calming focus that you brought to our day, and I think that it's hopefully a memory that people will remember this time here at Government House, where you actually welcomed the this ceremony of reconciliation. It is, and we look forward to the teachings of Amelia as part of the ceremony in terms of the Métis teachings, and we it is such a bonus having you here, Chief, in terms of us again looking to you and your people to this celebration of success and vibrant Indigenous culture and a people that sets such an amazing example for Canada. So, c'est vraiment important pour moi d'être ici ce matin dans l'Est de Terre-Neuve afin de célébrer le solstice d'hiver et de réfléchir sur le thème de la réconciliation entre les autochtones et les non-autochtones au Canada. So, as Yvonne said to you, this was somehow the arc of the story that I felt we needed to do. With Minister Joly in May, we met at the Vancouver airport at the beautiful Bill Reid sculpture and acknowledged that reconciliation would be one of the themes. So here we are on the other coast, and as Yvonne explained, we felt that the arc of this year needed to not crowd into January 1st, but we could actually do this solstice to solstice to solstice with the June 21st National, hopefully by then, Indigenous Day in Ottawa with the Prime Minister, and for us to be able to move from the solstice here to the solstice in Ottawa to the solstice in the Yukon next year. There's also the arc of the story from the Othic people who were just extinguished to the Yukon, where we have the most self-governing nations. And so that this is, again, a journey that we're hoping, as more and more First Nations will be able to get out from under the Indian Act, for the Métis people to be able to realize and exercise their rights, and for the Inuit to be able to, again, with land claims and the ability to understand the people, the land, the water, the ice, and how this is about this amazing announcement yesterday about Northerners and Inuit people having a real say in shaping Northern policy as we go forward. So it is at the time in British Columbia, Melanie Joly announced some signature projects on the reconciliation theme. It was that there would be some almost $2 million to Reconciliation Canada that is in doing that work of the rapprochement between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. There was money for INSPIRE, for intercultural training, and the amazing new group 4Rs, which is youth deciding that they will tell the story of the journey, and how this is a truly bottom-up, in youth-led, youth-designed program. A couple of years ago, when I was asked to write something for Canada 150 around the Charlottetown conference 2 years ago, I decided to talk a little bit about my, instead of 7 teachings, but my 7 aha moments of what it is to have new friends who are teaching you all the time. And so in us acknowledging the relationship, and in us looking to this relationship between First Peoples and the settlers, I felt that somehow all Canadians need to again understand that the thinking 7 generations out was a really important concept, that you would hand the land and the water to your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren 7. You would be thinking about 7 generations as you made every decision. As a physician, it's been very important for me to understand the medicine wheel rather than the medical model. That we would actually want to achieve balance in our lives, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and that we would think that we would keep people well rather than just patching them up when they get sick, which was Tommy Douglas's original goal for Medicare, that we wouldn't be running a repair shop. We actually need to keep people well and understand what it takes for people to be well. The Indigenous pedagogy that we were able to announce in Manitoba this week about learning by doing is again so important to me, that you learn physics by getting your canoe to go forward in a wind. You learn biology by cleaning a fish. You learn chemistry by using the brain of a deer to tan the hide. That there are this learning by doing, and the Indigenous way of knowing and teaching is way better than sterile little lines of chairs in a classroom in a Victorian school. We somehow came and erased how people really learn, and we're now starting to learn that more interactive methodologies and pedagogies is actually how people learn. Started with adult learning, now with kids. When you think of putting the children first, and that the chief's job or the leader's job was to make sure the children were okay, and if you made decisions that way, you would make good decisions. Listening to wise women, I've always thought was a good idea, and having this sort of matriarchal, matrilineal a way of making sure that the wise women are helping with the decisions. As I get older, I think the idea of elders versus elderly is really important, and I think I'd rather be an elder than elderly if I had my way. But I think one of the most important lessons for me is the kind of leadership. What Indigenous leadership was asking, not telling. It was a leader, not a boss. It was finding out what people needed and then making that happen. And whether it was a talking stick or whether it was sitting in an igloo listening to people, you had to find out what do people need and how do we help them get what they need. But the one that I didn't have in my 7 teachings a couple of years ago is the importance of ceremony. And I think that ceremonies like today, ceremonies where we mark certain times to actually celebrate and mark an occasion, and obviously the solstice being very exciting is something that I don't think I really understood about how important ceremony is, and probably it's going to be very important that we keep learning in terms of the strong practices that Indigenous people had before we came and thought we knew better. And that's, I think, the exciting part of this year coming up, where there will be a theme of reconciliation, and why we have been trying to get book clubs to read Indigenous authors in terms of hashtag Indigenous reads, or around Christmas with children's books, around hashtag gifting reconciliation, that there are many ways that we can educate ourselves as Canadians about what we didn't learn in school as non-Indigenous people. So in closing, I just want to talk in terms of my inspiration as Seamus and Vaughn, and I go through the members' entrance of the House of Commons every day, and as we leave, the stained glass window over top was designed by Christy Belcourt, and it's called Gininami Dinanmi, and it is about looking forward. It has 2008 in there because it marks the apology for residential schools, but it actually tells this amazing story from the theme of the truth and reconciliation that was about for the child that was taken, for the parent left behind. It is about the right middle panel that says, "I love you, my child," written in Cree and Ootchuk and Anishinaabe, as well as Mi'kmaq. And the child's grandfather sings a traditional song, singing, which speaks to the restoration of song, dance, ceremonies, and languages. So I guess as we launch, I think, this exciting year of celebrating all that Canada is, we are reminded on a daily basis of Gord Downey's message to us, because we have to be cognizant of the fact that there's lots of Indigenous people in this country saying, what is there to celebrate in terms of 150 years of colonization? That we actually have to say that Gord Downey is saying there's 150 years behind us to learn from, and there's 150 years ahead of us, and we better just get to work. And so that's what today's message is about. How do we get to work on the next 150 years? So thank you so much.
We really appreciate your remarks this morning, and I think you really summed it up in terms of where we're going into 2017 and beyond. I now have the great pleasure of inviting our Premier to say a few remarks. And before I do, I want to acknowledge a couple of things. I've known Premier Ball for a very long time, but I've had the opportunity to work with him over the last year on what has been some very difficult, very complicated issues around Indigenous governance, Indigenous projects, and Indigenous culture in Labrador. And I have to say, he really stood up and actually took the actions that was necessary. And that's not always easy to do, and we know that. And that's why for many years as Indigenous people, our issues were often overlooked and not confronted. They were often unresolved and more so ignored. So it takes tremendous strength and leadership to always stand for minorities, no matter who they are or where they are. And it takes tremendous leadership to bring all of the right people together to make the right decisions and to go forward in the right path. I got to witness that this year as the Premier met with all Indigenous leaders across Labrador to deal with very complex issues around the Muskrat Falls project, the environmental teamwork that had to happen for things to move forward. And I can't tell him or you how grateful we are, because it has restored our hope and our confidence in ensuring that Aboriginal people, Indigenous rights are heard, and that we're responded to, and that we are a real player at the table in a government-to-government relationship. Thank you, Premier Ball, and I'm so happy to have you here with us this evening. Join me in welcoming our Premier.
First, like to welcome Minister Bennett back to Newfoundland and Labrador. It's always great to see ministers, federal ministers, come to our province. But it's always very special when I get a chance to not only just bring to the province, but also as the minister responsible for Labrador and Aboriginal affairs to bring in the federal minister and listen to her kind words this morning and the passion that she shares for her portfolio as she spreads her news across the country, but as she starts with this special event right here in our capital city of St. John's. And a great morning it was, made possible, of course, by the St. John's Friendship Center, but our traditional teachers, Emma, and we had Janelle and Amelia. Always a pleasure for me to come and be in your presence. And I can tell you, as Yvonne said this morning, you know, to Emma, it was all right to hug the Premier. It certainly is, because every time I see Emma, I've been her many, many times over the years. She comes with a lot of enthusiasm and passion for traditional roots, and for all of you. And Emma is just one example of people that I see all across our province who want to share their traditional knowledge, because it's something that we really didn't do a very good job of for many, many years. I grew up, as many of you would know, on the west coast of Newfoundland, and it was not something that was often talked about. Yet I have family members who now have strong Aboriginal roots. So, but as we've seen such advancements in the last few years, and I can tell you, you are leaving a mark. But it's because we have such great leaders. As Premier and as the Minister for Labrador and Aboriginal Affairs, I get the opportunity to work with many leaders firsthand. I do it both at the provincial level and at the national level. And some of the proudest moments that I had in my first year as Premier of this province is when I sat at a First Minister's table, like we did just last week in Ottawa. I see national leaders sitting to that table in truly a government-to-government relationship. We take the same approach. We started that early on in my mandate in this province with our own Aboriginal leaders. We see it with our leaders in Labrador, with Anastasia, Joanna, and Todd. But I'm going to single out a man that I've got so much respect for. I said this publicly before, but the first time I met Chief Joe, I can tell you, for those people in this room that doesn't understand what we often question what leadership is all about. Well, there's a guy right here that I'm so pleased that he's with us this morning. I didn't even realize he was coming in today, but this is a guy who I'll tell you that shows such strong leadership and vision, not only just for his own people, but indeed for our province. And Chief, I will acknowledge that again, as I have so many times, how much I really appreciate what you do on a daily basis. You are inspiring people. I tell you, my friend, keep doing what you're doing. We need strong leaders like you in our province, not just because you represent your Aboriginal groups, but also you represent Newfoundlanders and Labradorians all across this country. I have a lot of respect for what you do. Keep up the good work. I also, Yvonne just mentioned about, I guess back in October, I see Trevor Bell in the room. And Trevor was one of the people that was in the room with us that night. And Trevor will tell you that we went in there to courage in that room that night. It took a long day, but I can tell you the commitment was there. As we set aside and said, we are going to do what's right for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, what is right for the Aboriginal groups in Labrador on this particular issue. Because what it was, from my point of view, it was actually, we were working on a number of files, and we started a meeting like this. We cannot let this one issue sabotage all the important things that we are doing on a daily basis, because we want to make a difference. And when we can't get this dealt with, this is going to stand in the way of some great work that we want to do together. When I made the commitment to become the Minister responsible for Aboriginal Affairs, it was truly committed to a government-to-government relationship. That's the way it had to be. People often ask me, as a who live in a small town in Deer Lake on the west coast, why do you feel you should be Minister responsible for Aboriginal Affairs? It's because of this simple, fundamental belief that I hold. Is if you're going to be Premier, and you're going to make a commitment to a government-to-government relationship, well, if you are the leader, well, then you should be the leader with your Aboriginal community as well. And in October of this year, we've taken that a step further. I'm pleased that in the vision statement that we've had is that we've made a commitment to an annual leaders forum with all our traditional and Aboriginal leaders. Because I need to give our Aboriginal communities, Indigenous people, the opportunity to, not just on a daily basis, but really have that one annual forum where we share the agendas that we set ourselves for the coming months. So this is where we are. The first one will be done in the spring of 2016. wise women, it's not always just good to listen to wise women. It's actually great to listen to wise women. I have a woman here with me today that I know is saying you have a 9 o'clock appointment that you better get to. And so I'm going to have to leave, but before I do, I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, all the best in the new year. I'm looking forward to working with folks like you in this room. You acknowledge the MPs, the MHAs, the councillors, and the leaders of all your various communities who are with us today. So all the best over the holiday season. More working with you in 2017. Now I'm going to listen to this voice will be my life. So thank you very much.
So thank you, Trainer, for joining us, and we fully understand, so here we go. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Amelia Ryan. Amelia is a proud Métis woman, originally from the Pacific Northwest. She has made St. John's her home for the past 4 years. She is currently a cultural support worker for the St. John's Native Friendship Center. And at the center, which the minister and I got to visit back a few months ago when we were in St. John's, she also worked on the National Faceless Doll Project, tracking and honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Newfoundland and Labrador, while raising awareness of what was happening. She's here today to share with us a Métis teaching, so I want you to help me welcome Amelia and to
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak here this morning. As Yvonne said, my name is Amelia Rhymer, and I am a proud Métis woman. I'd first like to take a moment to once again acknowledge the land upon which we meet today, that this is unceded and unsurrendered Mi'kmaq and Beothuk territory here on the island of Newfoundland. For a traditional introduction and to locate myself to spirit, I'm the granddaughter of Ralph and Mary Rhymer of Elm Creek, Manitoba, and I'm also the granddaughter of Ed and Gertrude Peer of the Nez Perce Reserve in Idaho. I'm also the proud mother of 2 sons who are descended through their father from the Makah, the Nachalas, the Passamaquoddy, the Quileute, and the Cowichan. My great-grandfather attended the Métis School for Boys at St. Peter's Mission in Montana, where Louis Riel himself taught school while he was on exile from Canada. My grandmother, on the other hand, had a white mother and was able to attend school in the city. Each new school year, teachers would ask her to the front of the classroom to explain to her classmates why she was so better. Shaming her of her heritage and pushing her to hide who she was. Being Métis is a complex mixture of culture and spirituality. Métis family structures are based on balanced, reciprocal relationships and holding children at the center of it all. Many times, families are still upholding 18th and 19th century expressions of home and family. Métis children absorb teachings from both their mothers and their fathers. We remember the stories and learn that the ancestors taught us to do things in certain ways for a reason. Here in Newfoundland and Labrador, it has been a confusing history of Métis recognition, to say the least. For years, many of mixed ancestry applied through other organizations for membership cards. Mi'kmaq here on the island, especially Halloween Mi'kmaq, prior to federal recognition, resorted to self-reporting as Métis. Nunatuavut, formerly known as Labrador Métis, are still struggling to gain recognition as Inuit people, not First Nations. When that recognition becomes official, Nunatuavut will be known as the southernmost Inuit in the world. The Métis people of Louis Riel Connected to both Indigenous and European teachings, we find a commonality and a connection between the dichotomy. As Indigenous people, we feel the need to live in harmony with the natural world. The winter solstice finds us on the shortest day and the longest night of the year. In the annual dance between Grandfather Sky and Grandmother Earth, this is the time of year to listen to intuition in the warm space of darkness. It is during this dark time that the stories from our elders come out, that we learn to remember who we are and where we come from. It is also a celebration that we are again moving towards the balance of the dark and the light, looking forward to longer, brighter days ahead. With this winter time too, elders, as all throughout the year, but elders come forward with so many of their stories. I would like to thank Emma for bringing us the light today. And I'd like to thank Chief Joe for the teachings I picked up from him along the way. And I'm so very appreciative of teachings I've learned, not only from my own family, but other elders I encounter in my journey. And this brings us closer, closer, closer. With the new year of 2017, we celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Government of Canada. The relationship between the Government of Canada and Indigenous peoples has been rocky and unpleasant, to say the least. I was having a hard time thinking what we could say to celebrate some of that, but there is. We recognize the truth of the wrongs that have happened and continue to happen, but hopefully we can move forward to right the wrongs and create a new future with healthy relationships and healthy partnerships. Nakamik, Jinaskaman, Lalio, Leko, Plepo, Marcy.
Merci, Amelia. Thank you for those beautiful words. We now have Chief Mistletoe with us, and I know that both Premier Ball and Minister Bennett have acknowledged the great work that Chief Joe has done. I think when you look at First Nations right across the country, you will hear from all of us and throughout the Department of Indigenous and Northern Affairs that the people he leads and his community is a role model for First Nations in Canada. We look to them for guidance. We refer many other chiefs to them for guidance. And we have reached out as a government to even ask Chief Joe and his people to work with other First Nations in our province and in Canada to help them, encourage them, and show them the way together as partners in this great model that they've developed. And we're very honored to have him with us today, and I want you to help me welcome him and ask him to bring some greetings to all of us. So,
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. And when I was sitting back there, it was easy to forget what I'm going to say. Now that I'm up here, it's not so easy. Conde River is a unique community. We left out of the terms of union, so we took care of ourselves right up until registration took place in 1987. So we took that same type of model of looking after ourselves into registration. So we knew how to look after ourselves. We knew we had to build our community to suit what we want to do and how we want to do it. So that's what we've been able to do. That's how we've been able to be successful. But for me, a life-changing story for me was I visited a friend one night and I heard Chief Dan George talk about his version of O Canada. And he went on to talk about celebrating 100 years of O Canada, and his version of O Canada was so different than the song O Canada. And he talked about, the loss of pride being a drunk, being portrayed in the movies as a savage, less important in the lives of Aboriginal people in the buffalo that range the plains. Went on to say that we're beaten, we have nothing, but no, there are things that we can do. The tools that the white men have brought to us is the education. We have to teach our young people to be educated, to take care of themselves, and we no longer need the warriors, the battles, the fight for dignity for our people. We need to educate them. We need to use those tools to build our nation to be stronger. And from that day forward in 1982, that's what's been in my heart in terms of building a community. Educate our young people. And those are the people that will see us into those 7 generations that we all talk about. Those are the people that are strengths of our nation. They will take us there. And they are taking us there. We built a community based on those bases of letting our young people build the community. Because they know, they understand, and they appreciate what you have if you build it yourself. That's where we've come from. We can sit in our chairs and dwell on the past. The history has not been kind. But guess what? Today we're in the driver's seat. We know once you're in the driver's seat where we're going to go and what we want to do and how we want to get there. So listen to the history is fine, but you want to go forward, you need to be sitting in the front seat, not in the back seat, and somebody else take you where you want to go. We're driving this truck now. We know where we want to go. And with the good help of your department, you, Minister, we'll get there. And your good help, all the good help that we can get. We're all, believe it or not, we're all partners in this. There's no such thing as I or we in our community. Everybody's a partner. Because you have to reach out to everyone to be part of what we want to do. I don't want to offend the Premier, but for people that have come from outside Newfoundland, welcome to our rock. You don't tell him that, though. He thinks it's his rock. It's really our rock. And,
That's on Twitter.
I forgot about the cameras. But our people grew up being afraid of the church. They grew up being afraid of government. They grew up being afraid of the police. And I was sitting in my chair the other day, and I was texting. My wife asked me, "Who are you texting?" I said, "I'm texting the Premier." She said, "You can't do that." I said, "Of course I can." He should be worried about texting me, not me texting him. And that's how far we've come in terms of building a relationship with government. My grandfather would have been mortified that someone, as an Aboriginal person, would be able to text the government, especially a Premier or a government member. That's how far our children have come in terms of dealing with the outside world. So the future looks bright, and it's bright because we have a better understanding, a better respect for each other, and we're doing it the right way. We're respecting all differences of people. And with that, I'll say, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Malani, thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, the next part here, it says I get to make short remarks of my own, but I'm thinking if we're gonna finish at 9:30, I better skip over that part because I don't know how to make short remarks. So that could be a problem. But I do want to do a couple of things, and I'm always cautious about signaling out people in the room, but I think sometimes that needs to be done for people to really understand the great work that's being done by so many people. And also I want to recognize Councillor Galgay, who's here with us today from the City of St. John's, and thank you for attending and being here. But when we're moving forward with the Indigenous agenda across Canada, it's not just Indigenous governments and the Government of Canada or the government and territorial governments and territories and provinces. It's about all the people who do the heavy lifting, who do all the work that sometimes, you know, we don't really see it because it comes out under a government headline or it just appears somewhere in Twitter or on a press release. But I look around this room and I see people who have really lifted up Indigenous culture in this province and across Canada. And I'm going to start by saying congratulations to Dr. Trevor Bell and his group on their achievement with Smart Ice, which is a new innovative project that I can't wait to get moving and see how it's going to work across the north, and including in my riding, by the way. So not biased, not at all. And, but it's just, again, someone who's committed themselves to working with people across the north and making a difference, and huge difference that it's making, inspiring so many people, giving so many people hope and opportunity. And you know, quite often we don't get to read or see a lot of these stories until many years after, but they're happening right now. And look at Gerald Anderson and Catherine from the university and all the work they've been doing with Aboriginal fisheries, with education for Indigenous groups, and tremendous projects, and that we're so happy to be a part of. And I saw Bill Golding here, I don't know if he's still here or not, but I tell you, if there's ever a way to get Aboriginal infrastructure for fisheries in Newfoundland and Labrador, it's going to happen through people like him, who recognize that for years the Government of Canada didn't see fishing industry commercially for Indigenous people as one of those huge priorities in communities like where you come from, you know. And so there's so many, and I see Philip Earle here from Labrador, who sits on the board for the Nunatsiavut group of companies, who've been able to create employment opportunities for so many young Inuit in Labrador. It's just been absolutely amazing. And you know, I could go on and on, but I won't, because it says here it had to be short. I am going to tell you a story, because we're here at Government House, and as the minister knows, it was very important for me. I really wanted to do this event here. It's the first time we've ever did a real Indigenous event in the city as a group by the Government of Canada. And we couldn't have done it without the help of Chris and the staff at the St. John's Friendship Center, who, by the way, prepared all this food that you have to eat before you leave. But when I was doing a panel in Winnipeg back last spring at our convention, one of the first questions that I was asked as part of the APTN panel was, do you think there will ever be an Indigenous person as a lieutenant governor in Canada or in the territories or the provinces? And you know, it wasn't a question that I was prepared for, because the colonialism that separated Crown and Indigenous people was so evident. And we were at a point where we were trying to deal with reconciliation. How do we bring our society back? How do we bring that real recognition and healing for Indigenous people? And I sat there and I said, you know, it's an unusual question, but you know, Indigenous people has never looked to that institution as a place where they belonged or where they were accepted in any way. So I said, it is an unusual question, but you know, my answer was yes. And yes, you will. Yes, you will, because reconciliation is about building that relationship and allowing all people to share in what's happening. And I think the fact that so many of us are here today, and look around at each other, because you've just made history, by the way, that the fact that we're here is very significant. And as Chief Missile Joe has said, and as Amelia said, you know, it's the unconquered, unsurrendered lands of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq people. and as been claimed by current day Inuit and all Inuit First Nations in Newfoundland and Labrador. It's very symbolic for us. And you know, as we teach and build that relationship with all people in our province between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, it's important that we understand the significance of institution and infrastructure and the role that that has played in creating the divide as well, and how we continue to bring that together. So for me, it's an honor to be here because it symbolizes something very important, but it symbolizes a way forward, that we're able to be here as Indigenous people and to feel good. And we feel good because we started our day in a wonderful way. In a wonderful way. And I want to thank Janelle, and I want to thank her group for allowing us to do that, to share in ceremony, to bring that peace to each other and to feel good about what we were doing. So right now, I want to ask them to come. They're going to perform a final piece for us, which will conclude our ceremony today. But first I want to tell you about Janelle Didal and the Eastern Owl Women's Drumming Group. Janelle is a proud Mi'kmaq woman from the west coast of Newfoundland. She is passionate about working with marginalized groups and is currently a cultural support worker and program facilitator with the St. John's Native Friendship Center. She is a mother, an advocate for women and Indigenous people, and a musician with Eastern Owl Women's Drumming Group. She is a believer in holistic approaches to healthy living in mind, body, and spirit. The group came together in 2012 to celebrate Mi'kmaq music, culture, and to inspire change and awareness among Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike. They take all nations approach to membership, as do the Native Friendship Centers, and they see the drum as the heartbeat of Canada. She's joined today by Rebecca Short, Stacey House, and Natasha Blackwood. So I'd like to ask them to come and perform for us and to say thank you in advance, because we really appreciate your time and your talent and being a part of what has been an extraordinary event for us. After they finish, I would like to ask everyone here to join with us in the front for a group picture that we can have for our little momentum. So thank you very much.
So this is a traveling song, and I guess we just want this song, the message to travel across Canada, that reconciliation is possible and that we can come together to celebrate our nation as one people, because we're all just human, right?